Thank you for watching our video. Today's video we're going to run a 1976 fuel gauge through it for you test. The test that we're going to show you are tests you can perform on your car either at the gauge or at the sending unit. The purpose of this is basically to allow you to look at your gauge and try to determine what the problem is. I would advise you to go to the website and upload your car for the under the help and repair and install section. We have some help guides that are on there, and you can use those as a follow along if you'd like to. Fuel gauge works on a basic principle. It has power, ground, and a ohms input signal from the sending unit. The ohms input signal will vary from 0 on empty to 90 ohms full. It's a linear scale, so a half a tank is going to be 45 ohms. So if you look at this gauge, we're sitting there right now and it's at a half a tank. We can take it down to 0, which is empty. We can take it over to full, and we're using what's called a linear potentiometer. But you can order them online, and they're actually fairly cheap if you want to test with one. An old school way of testing would be to use a flasher instead of a potentiometer. A flasher usually generates about 50 to 55 ohms of resistance, and you can use that for your sending wire if you need be. So basically what we're going to do is run it through some tests. Let's say the ohms wire falls off your gas tank sending unit. If the ohms wire falls off your sending unit and it's not touching anything, your gas gauge is going to go basically to just above the top of the rivet. If you see this on your fuel gauge when you turn your key on, that's what your problem is. Your ohms wire is either off the sending unit, it's broken somewhere between the sending unit and the dash gauge. Again, the help and repair file will give you a little bit of advice as far as technique on finding out where the problem is. The next test is going to confirm that the wire is good between the tank and the sending unit. And basically what you're going to do is you're going to ground out that wire. So if you pull your ohms wire off the sending unit and you ground it out to the frame, you're going to get a reading that's going to look something like this. And it goes all the way to E. So that's if you ground out the sending unit wire. Now that will tell you that if you get a gauge that responds like this, that's going to tell you the dash unit's working fine. It won't tell you if it's working accurately or not, but it will tell you that the dash unit is working in working order. You'll notice how slow the gauge responds too. It doesn't just zip over. The fuel gauge, the water temperature gauges, and the oil pressure gauges, pretty much any gauge that's available or that's been produced is basically a plastic retainer housing that's filled full of resistance oil. Some gauges use a lighter oil than others. When this oil dissipates with the fuel gauge, what you'll get is a sway in the gauge, or overreactive fuel gauge. If you look at this piece right here that I'm setting down, and I think we can get on that, that's basically the internals of a gauge. And I've posted a picture up on the forums about there's a spindle inside. This is a plastic housing right here, and inside right, let me find something to point with. You can see this is the needle pointer. This is what the needle, or the needle spindle. This is what the needle attaches to. The gauge sometimes will leak oil out of here. This one's cooked, but when it leaks the resistance oil out, then the gauge just flops and sways all over the place. So we've done the no ohms input test. We've done the grounded out test. The next test we're going to show you is if the gauge is actually missing the ground. And unfortunately, if the gauge is missing the ground, it's going to give you the exact same response, and this is what it gives you. This is the exact same response you get if your ohms wire is grounded out in the back. So it's going to be kind of tough. You're going to have to see if the other test works. If the other test works, then your gauge does have a ground, and that would be if the gauge goes from empty to full when you ground or unhook the ohms wire. So you can eliminate a no ground gauge by performing the other test. Obviously, if the gauge doesn't have power, it's not going to read anything. And you can see here, there's a gauge. You can move it wherever you want to. It doesn't matter. But boy, as soon as it gets power, it's going to jump right back to where it's supposed to be. It doesn't really jump. Now, temperature gauge is a little bit different. Temperature gauge is a faster responding gauge. that you can see it jumped right back. So there's only one more test that we can do on a fuel gauge, and basically that's what if the a resistor on the back of the gauge is grounded out. I'm going to pause the video here. I'm going to take the resistor out and then resume it. So what we've done now is we've removed the resistor off the back of the gauge. Can we see this resistor? This is the resistor. It's a 90 ohm resistor. When it's removed, if you want to check it, you check it from side to side. Should read 90 ohms. If it's blown, you can rewind it with resistance wire you can buy online. You can replace it with regular resistors. As long as they total 90 ohms, there'll be kind of a pain to sock in the back. But in the past, we have had to just put regular resistors across the back, and we put the little outlet loop terminals on there so they can bolt right in place. This resistor is not available, so you either got to replace it or repair it. Now we've got the gauge here, and now we've removed the resistor basically so we could show you what it does when it's blown. It's kind of tough if you know your fuel gauge has got let's say more than a half a tank of fuel in it. The furthest a fuel gauge will read with a blown resistor is right here, and you're going to see it, and it's usually just a shade past a quarter of a tank. Okay, now that's with the blown resistor. Now if you're out of gas, it will still read. You look here, we'll put it back to zero input. If you're out of gas, it will still read from zero or from empty to to just shy of a quarter of a tank. So if you get a gauge that's only working between a quarter and empty, you've got a blown resistor. If you've got a full tank and you're only getting this reading that's shown on the gauge right now, I would look real hard at the resistor. I hope you've enjoyed the video, and if you get a chance, check out our website. It's willcoxcorvette.com with 2 L's. If you have any questions, please direct them to our support department at support@willcoxcorvette.com. We kindly ask that you don't call our sales staff about fuel gauge problems. They're just going to refer you to me at the support address. Thank you and have a nice day.